Hello everyone, welcome back viewers to this ongoing lecture series on A Suitable Boy at CEC-UGC. This is in continuation to the several lectures that I've had on the novel A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. It's good to see you all once again to this another lecture in this long lecture series on an extremely long, interesting and dense novel, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. It's a really lengthy novel, as we know, but each page that you read in this novel offers you something unique and offers you a narrative and several characters which have since its publication remained immortal within the broad sphere of Indian English literature. Arguably, I would say that this novel offers the most unforgettable and the most memorable reading experience to the readers, for it is dense with realism, dense with minute details of everyday life, dense with political tensions of the times in which it was written, dense with human emotions, dense with societal expectations of family and marriage, and therefore, I call this novel A Suitable Boy as a panorama of the larger socio-political times of the post-1950s India. The novel offers a panoramic view of life itself in India. On this note, I welcome you all again to this lecture. My name is Piyush Chaudhary and I am currently working as an assistant professor at the Department of English at Hansraj College, University of Delhi. Now, in the previous part, which was the first part of the lectures, in the previous several parts, we discussed at length the detailed summary of all the parts of A Suitable Boy. We completed the entire novel part by part, and in this part of this lecture, we'll be studying the various characters of the novel and their significance on the whole novel as a whole. We'll also discuss some other aspect like Seth's construction of the nation, that is India, in this novel, and how Seth constructs the country, the nation India. We'll also briefly discuss Lata's choice of her suitable boy. We will discuss why she chose Haresh as her suitable boy, and we'll also be discussing several other themes. Now, let me just show you my detailed plan for this lecture and what we are going to study in the subsequent lectures. As you can see on the slide, the first topic that we'll be discussing is the character analysis of major characters in the novel, and then also some minor characters. Then I'll also be discussing Seth's attempt of narrating the nation, that is India, and Seth's realism, and several other relevant themes and discussions will follow later on. So this will be my detailed plan for this lecture today. Now, as you can see the list of characters, and this is the list of characters that you have, as you can see. For example, first I'll be discussing on Mrs. Rupa Hera, the mother of Lata, Minakshi, Arun Mea, Vun Mea, Man Kapoor, Saida Bai, then Nawab of Baitar, that is the Khan, Mahesh Kapoor, Feroz Khan, Rashid, Savita Kapoor, Haresh Khanna, Malati, the Chatterjee family, and so on and so forth. So these will be the various characters that I'll be discussing. Now, let me go forward to the very first character, and that is Mrs. Rupa Hera. Now, Mrs. Rupa Hera is the mother of Lata, the protagonist of the novel. So throughout the novel, we notice Mrs. Rupa Hera's sudden outburst of emotions related to the marriage of her daughter Lata. We are told in multiple junctures in the novel how Mrs. Rupa Hera's nose suddenly reddens whenever she hears anything which brings her pain or which might bring her an emotional breakdown. She is very susceptible to emotional breakdowns and she starts crying on any pretext which seems to haunt her. The novel opens with Rupa Hera telling Lata that she too will marry the boy she chooses for her. If the readers remember the very first part, the very opening lines of the novel. This makes it clear firstly that Savita married Pran because of her mother's wish only. Mrs. Rupa Hera even visits Delhi to find a suitable boy for Lata. And we notice that throughout the novel, it is only Mrs. Rupa Hera who is concerned about the marriage of her daughter. Her sons, Arun and Varun, seem more or less unconcerned about their sister's marriage. But Rupa Hera is absolutely obsessed with it. Right? So she goes to great lengths to write letters to her father, her elder son Arun, and even to her family friend Kalpana to find suitable boys for Lata. When she realizes that the men are not being very helpful, what she does, she visits Delhi to her younger friend Kalpana Gaur to look for prospective grooms for her daughter Lata. She even rejects several boys for frivolous things by looking at their photographs. So this scene shows her as a prejudiced, opinionated woman. However, her luck seems to run strong when she finally meets a Khatri boy, Haresh Khanna, at Kalpana's house. And this happens in part 9 of the novel, which is a very funny satiric commentary on the process of matchmaking in Indian households. So Mrs. Mehra is seen reciting her daily ritual of Bhagavad Gita which is an ancient Hindu text in part 9.1 of the novel. Ironically, the shloks that she reads out are about detachment from worldly affairs, but Mrs. Rupa Mehra remains firmly attached to the worldly affairs and to the materialism around. So even in part 9.9, impressed by Haresh's prospects, she arranges a meeting between Haresh and her daughter Lata. So in this part, she comes across as the perfect matchmaker, trying to strike a conversation between Haresh and Lata. She even insists on calling her Ma instead of Mrs. Mehra. When Haresh calls her Mrs. Mehra, she says that you should call me Ma. She does this deliberately so that there can develop a more personal relation between her and her prospective future son-in-law Haresh. So we notice how she performs as the perfect matchmaker when other men of the household do very little to ensure Lata's marriage. Even her father, Dr. Kishan Seth, does very little. He does not help her, despite his promises of fixing a meeting between a radiologist doctor and Lata. When the men do not act, it is Mrs. Rupa Mehra who takes it upon herself to ensure a suitable boy for her daughter. Mrs. Mehra takes upon herself the responsibility of even the conduct of Lata. Being a traditional upper caste and middle class woman herself, she has strict codes of morality and mannerisms, which she wants her two daughters to uphold firmly. Savita is the more compliant and the docile daughter who follows exactly what her mother says. Lata, however, has a mind and a heart of her own, and she becomes a difficult case for her at times. So the idea of an ideal wife involved completely in domestic affairs, and the idea of a woman being family-centric is something which appeals to Rupa Mehra, and this is something she expects from both her daughters too. It is interesting to note that her upper caste credentials make her desire a boy from the same upper caste. She cannot conceive the idea of a daughter marrying a boy from outside her caste, let alone outside her religion. Therefore, the news of Lata wanting to marry Kabir Durrani comes as a grave shock to her. She even does not want Lata to marry Amit Chatterjee because they don't belong to the same caste. He is a Bengali. So she prefers Haresh Khanna for several reasons. First and foremost, because he is an upper caste Khatri and belongs to the same caste as the Mehras. This is the most important reason for Mrs. Rupa Mehra, and that is why she stresses on his caste again and again in several parts of the novel. So while introducing Haresh to Lata, she stresses on his caste most forcefully. Haresh also reminds her of her dead husband Raghubir Mehra for his steadfastness, for his confidence, for his penchant for hard work and his industriousness. All these factors combine together to make Haresh as the most suitable boy for Mrs. Rupa Mehra to be married off to her daughter Lata. She is also prejudiced against the Bengalis, as I have mentioned. She does not like Minakshi Chatarji, who is a very strong, assertive woman who is modern in her thoughts and modern in her cultural values. But she does not like it as it does not befit the Mehra family household and Mrs. Rupa Mehra's notions of acceptable behavior. This is another reason, as I mentioned, why she does not want Lata to be married to Minakshi's younger brother Amit Chatterjee. This is because she does not want someone from the same family to marry her Lata, as she is quite worried about the Chatterjees. She thinks that the Chatterjee family is too modern and cannot control their children. Look at these lines in part 13.15 to understand why she does not like the Chatterjees. See on the slide, Minakshi was wearing those little gold horrors that never failed to upset Mrs. Rupa Mehra. And what was Kakoli doing here during term time? Really, thought Mrs. Rupa Mehra, the Chatterjees impose no discipline upon their children, and that is why they are also peculiar. This is part 13.15. So to control one's children is also, as we know by now, Rupa Mehra's one of her many typical character traits, exemplified most vividly in her choice for Lata's husband. She stresses right in the beginning lines of the novel that just like Savita, Lata too would marry the boy that she chooses. And then at the end of the novel, she says the same thing to her younger son Varun as well. Look at these lines. At the end of the novel, she says, "You too will marry a girl I choose," said Mrs. Rupa Mehra firmly to her younger son. "A suitable girl, that is what I want for you. This is what your daddy would have wanted, a suitable girl and no exceptions." So she keeps a watchful eye on Lata, ensuring that she does not meet Kabir or spend much time with Amit Chatterjee either. So Vikram Seth, in a light, humorous and ironic manner, describes how the mother tries to act as a savior for her daughter-in-law, for her daughter in all walks of life. But despite her idiosyncrasies and her habit of emotional breakdown, she comes across as a caring mother, a gentle friend to almost everyone in the novel. When the news of the miscarriage of Minakshi reaches her, she writes a letter to her and shows utmost genuine concern towards her daughter-in-law, who on most of the times she did not like for her overtly assertive behavior. Look at these lines now on the slide. And poor Minakshi, thought Mrs. Rupa Mea, she must write to her at once. She felt that a creamy cambric was called for, and her eyes moist with sympathy, she went to get the writing paper from her bag. Minakshi, the cold-hearted middle melter, was replaced for a while with the image of Minakshi, the vulnerable, tender, broken vehicle for Mrs. Rupa Mehra's third grandchild. So overall, Mrs. Mehra is a kind-hearted woman, but she has her own set of weaknesses as well, right? So this was the character analysis of Rupa Mehra. Now the next character, as you can see, she is Minakshi. Now Minakshi Chatarji Mehra is one of the minor characters in Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy. She is married to Arun Mea and plays a very significant role in reflecting the social dynamics of the post-colonial Indian society, especially its emerging upper class. She is the flamboyant character and she has a very strong sense of materialism, and there is some superficiality also associated with her. As a fashionable, sophisticated and materially driven woman, and coming from a privileged upper class aristocratic Bengali family, she is particularly different from the Mehras, who are more traditional and simpler in their lifestyle. Now look at these lines, how Mrs. Rupa Mehra describes Minakshi in the first part 1.1 of the novel. That Minakshi was Arun's glamorous wife and her own disrespectful daughter-in-law. In 4 years of marriage, Minakshi's only worthwhile act in Mrs. Rupa Mehra's eyes had been to give birth to her beloved granddaughter, Aparna. So referring to Minakshi as that Minakshi, right, shows the mother-in-law's discontent with her daughter-in-law, who shows no signs of cultural and behavioral resemblance with the more traditional Mehras. So throughout the novel, she is preoccupied with appearances, social status, luxury, parties, and her obsession with high society is evident in her frequent trips to exclusive parties and her relentless desire to maintain her outward elegance. But she is also a product of her social environment, where status, wealth, and appearances are highly valued. So she is the embodiment, I would say, Minakshi is the embodiment of the modern woman, of the modern world, not just by her demeanor, but also by her language and her dress sense. Now look at these lines in part 4.4, as you can see on the screen. She herself was wearing a green and gold sari of Banaras silk, with a green choli that exposed more of her midriff than Brahmapur society was normally privileged or prepared to see. Part 4.4. So Minakshi was hence dressed boldly and is a stark contrast to the traditional Mehras. She also refers to Lata as Lats, thereby showing her more glamorous, playful and intellectual taste with names. So throughout the novel, Minakshi exhibits a self-centeredness that alienates her from all the other characters around. She is focused on her own pleasure, needs and desires. She also indulges in an adulterous extramarital affairs with Bili Irani. She has a disregard for traditional marital fidelity and for traditions too, as she even melts the medals she received from her mother-in-law belonging to the dead father-in-law. Remember? So this illustrates her more self-indulgent nature and her disregard for traditional values. She is a stark contrast to Lata Mehra, as we know, is the protagonist of the novel, and she is traditional, she is introspective, she is thoughtful in her outlook. Minakshi, on the other hand, is superficial, concerned with fleeting pleasures, fleeting desires, and her marriage to Arun, as we know in the novel, was sudden and perhaps was a marriage of convenience than affection, as Arun worked in the high circles of society and boasted of an anglicized life. So both Arun and Minakshi are part of the cosmopolitan English-speaking class that is eager to embrace Western norms and consumerisms. They come from different cultural backgrounds, of course, that is also a given. Arun, as we know, is a Punjabi and Minakshi is Bengali, but they share common goals in terms of maintaining their affluent lifestyle and attending ball parties and believing in more material aspects about life. So both Arun Mehra and Minakshi Mehra, the couple, represents the emerging Indian elite in the post-independence India, right? So this is Minakshi Mehra, this was Minakshi Mehra as a character. Now let us go to the next slide. As you can see, the third character that we have here is Arun Mea. Now, Arun Mea is Lata's eldest brother, and he too, like his wife, has an extreme focus. He gives extreme focus to wealth, status, power, and mostly at the cost of his own familial personal relationships. For Arun, appearances and social standing matter deeply, and he prioritizes social prestige over emotional connections. And that is why he goes to great lengths to write against Harish, describing how he is not the suitable boy for Lata. So, Arun's concern with Lata's marriage is less about Lata's happiness, right? It is very less about Lata's happiness, and it is more about ensuring that she marries into a family of status and wealth. So, his desire to control Lata's future reflects his broader conservative worldview, where personal desires are secondary to social obligations and you can say social appearances, right, and appearances in society. So, that is why he asks Lata to not marry Harish, as he is not at par with the Chatterjees. So, Arun is the modern British bred man who disliked Indian customs, as we know, and you can even call him as a brown sahib. Okay. So, as the description goes, and you can see the slide here, if ever there was a man enraptured by England and the English, it was he. In this case, he is Arun Mea, and here he was hobnobbing with them on terms of tolerable familiarity, part 7.20 of the novel. So, this describes the character of Arun, right. So, he is always enraptured by England and English and the English culture, right. He valued the pomp and show of the aristocratic families, and he prefers the modernity and refined taste of the Chatterjees more than the simplicity and the traditional outlook of Kapoors and Mehras. And with his younger brother Varun, he behaves even worse, right. He disrespects Varun, he thinks that Varun is useless, and in a way he disdains him, he hates him for his love of Swadeshi. Like, as we know, Varun likes everything which is Desi and Swadeshi, and Arun, we can say, likes everything which is Videsi, right. He considers everything Swadeshi as lower grade, and at one point of time in the novel he even goes on to say that Churchill was a good man, and we all know Churchill had very bad views about India, because India was a colony of the British. Churchill had extremely bad news about, and it is quite open in the public forum, on Mahatma Gandhi, but still Arun used to praise Churchill. So, he was that Churchill loving, anglicized man, right. So, look at these lines as you can see on the slide to understand Arun's character, and I am going to read it. Arun used to listen to Churchill's speeches on the radio during the war and murmur, as he had heard the English murmur, "Good old Vinny." He used to call Winston Churchill as good old Vinny. Churchill loathed Indians and made no secret of it, and spoke with contempt of Gandhi, a far greater man that he could ever aspire to be, and Varun regarded Churchill with a visceral hatred, part 7.4. But at the same time, we get to know that in part 13.31, Arun has ironically never been to England. So, even though he is praising Churchill, he is praising the English lifestyle, he has ironically never been to England. Now, look at this description between Arun and Harish and the funny and the ironic conversation that occurs. "When were you last in England, Mr. Mehra?" asked Harish, who was feeling left out of the conversation, but something appeared to have got stuck in Arun's throat, because he took a handkerchief out of his pocket and began to cough, pointing with his left hand to his Adam's apple. His hostess was all solicitude. She ordered a glass of water for him. The servant brought in a thick tumbler of water on a stainless steel thali. Seeing Minakshi's horrified look, Mrs. Khandelwal shouted at the servant. When Arun had recovered and the drift of the conversation was about to change, Harish, feeling that Arun might appreciate his interest in him, he is once again repeating his question now. When was the last time you were in England? As we know that the very first time when Harish asked this question, Arun, he stammered a lot, and as you can see, he asks, "When was the last time you were in England?" Arun went red, then collected himself. There was now no escape for him. He had to answer the question. "Well," he said, with as much dignity as he could muster. As it happens, it might surprise you to learn that I have never actually had the opportunity to go there. But of course, we are going in a few months' time. Haresh was startled. He would never have dreamed of asking Arun whether he had ever been to England. He felt like laughing, but he dared not to do so. His eyes, however, disappeared in an expression of amusement. His host and hostess looked startled too. Minakshi began to talk quietly about bridge and how they simply had to have the Khandelwals over some time. And after a few minutes of polite conversations, the Mehra looked at their watches, exchanged glances, thanked their host, got up and left. Right? So the irony is that Arun Mehra appears to be the anglicized Churchill fan who praises the British and the colonial masters, but has ironically never visited England even once in his life. This makes his character shallow, prejudiced, and shows him in a very poor light. So in the novel, he dislikes his younger brother Varun and mistreats him constantly. In the novel, he bullies Varun for his timid nature and for wearing pajamas as it is a Desi Indian clothing. Arun himself prefers a very suited tie, and his sartorial preferences are Western and they are anglicized, and he prefers it over the Desi and Indian, the Indian kurta and pajama. So he is sort of a Macaulayan product, you can say. He bullies Varun and constantly mistreats him throughout the novel for his preference of country-made liquor and his choice of Indian classical songs. However, at the end of the novel, Varun trumps him when he becomes an IAS officer in the last part of the novel, in part 19. It is only then that Arun controls his tongue, as now he cannot speak much in front of his younger brother. Now, look at the next character. Since we are talking about the younger brother, the next character as we have here is Varun Mehra. Varun Mehra is the younger brother of Arun and the elder brother of Lata. He is a more subdued character. He is a very less dominant character compared to his siblings. His character offers a contrast to the more assertive figures in the novel. He is somewhat shy and he is withdrawn. So he provides a quiet contrast to the dominant Arun and Lata. Look at the line. He was thin, unsure of himself, sweet-natured and shifty-eyed, and he was Lata's favourite. Though he was a year older than her, she felt protective of him. So his character, as we saw from the slide, contrasts with the more successful Arun and the more decisive Lata. So Varun is a timid, shy young boy who finds it hard to live up to the expectations of his brother Arun Mehra. Arun, as we know, is a modern man, while Varun, the younger brother, he is more Desi and is more Indian in his habits and manners, and that infuriates his more modern and superficial British preferring elder brother Arun. His reluctance to stand up for himself or make bold decisions reflects his deep-seated insecurities. But overall, he is a kind and sensitive man who shares a good bond with his sister. He holds Swadeshi and his own country in high regard, much to the dismay of his elder brother Arun. So now there are several other characters, for example, Maan, Nawab, Haresh Khanna, Mahesh Kapoor, and several other characters are left. I will end this lecture on this note, so please wait on for the next part where I will be discussing all these characters in much greater detail. Thank you for now.